of Orlando, Florida, you are listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. And I am your host, David Gornoski. So glad to be with you once again in beautiful Central Florida, diving into the topics that the mainstream media and all of their minions in the groupthink circles of Washington just don't want to deal with. The problems that neighbors deal with. The things that matter. Not the things about who said what on the latest media contrived nonsense that just sucks all of our energy into these meaningless squabbles on late night or cable news or whatever late night comedians have said. We are about real world solutions. We know on A Neighbor's Choice that what matters is rolling up our sleeves, putting our skin in the game, and solving the problems ourselves as neighbors, not as members of political tribes that have to be constantly at war for power. I mean, I look at all of the things going on, and it just looks like, man, are you really sure that power you guys are fighting tooth and nail to take back from each other? Are you really sure it's going to give you what you think it's going to give you? Because I don't think it's worth all of the vitriol, all of the anger, all of the energy on this. We're only here for a few decades. We're only here for a few decades, folks. And that is something that we should take preciously into consideration, that there is no need to be fixated on these blame games in Washington, because those things aren't what lasts. What lasts are rolling up our sleeves and working in the market to create real innovation in whatever task you have. Do it to your best. Do it excellent. And that is what it means to be a neighbor. And that's what we do on this program. We explore heroes all over the world who are doing just that. And I know you are too. If you want to be a part of the discussion, the number to call is 866-916-5400. That's 866-916-5400. That's toll free. And I am very honored to have our guest here today. He is a good friend of mine and a great hero for the cause of liberty, Lawrence Reed. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, thank you, David. I sure appreciate those very kind words.
Yes, and you are the author of the new book, Real Heroes, Inspiring True Stories of Courage, Character, and Conviction. And I highly recommend people take a look at it. I really enjoyed the copy that you were so kind to share with me, and I want others to learn about the stories of the real heroes out there, because that's what we do on this program every week.
That's great.
And
thank you.
I also wanted to let people know that you're the president of the Foundation for Economic Education, and that's fee.org, where you guys are kind enough to publish many of my essays, which I really enjoy you doing that.
You are one of our most popular authors, David, so I hope you'll keep doing it.
Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciate you being here with me. You know, I am not really interested too much in the day-to-day, horse race and all that stuff, but I thought, who better than Larry Reed to have on the program this is the week before the election, and we really want to kind of dive into how should people who love liberty, and maybe whether they're Christian or not, they really admire the historical person of Jesus. So that's a lot of people out there in Radio Land. How should people like us, we love liberty, we're not so big on the tribalism and blame games, and we kind of imitate, we want to be like Jesus, whether we're atheist or Christian or whatever, we kind of see him as a good roadmap for how to be a human. How should we process these times? It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, they really are. Well, I think, first of all, people should understand that there is way too much emphasis on politics in our lives these days. And while I understand why people have such inflamed passions and get so involved in politics, I think we ought to stand apart from it for a moment and recognize that the very fact that it consumes so much of our lives is because government is so massive in terms of its reach, what it takes from us, what it tries to give to us, the ways that it regulates our lives. And it shouldn't be that way. Politics should be such a tiny corner of our lives that we can go about such far more productive things as wealth creation and civil society activities and so forth, knowing that government is just going to be there whenever we really need it, but it's not the provider of all things. So that's the first thing people should understand, that though they may lament this massive emphasis on politics, they should understand it's a direct outgrowth of giving government so much money, so much power, and making it far more central to our lives than I think certainly the Jesus would ever support.
Right. Now, you've been at the game of spreading the message of economic literacy and the principles of freedom and markets for many years. So I guess what I want to know is, knowing what you've seen, do you believe we're in an unprecedented time of vitriol and outrage, or is this nothing new under the sun?
Well, in American history, we certainly have had times during the 1860s, needless to say, that would be a prime example, where passions were tremendously high, and people were throwing all kinds of epithets at each other and even shooting each other in the case of the Civil War. So it's not unprecedented, but you look at the broad sweep of history, and it's quite apparent to me that time and again, when civilizations descend into the politicization of people's lives, when government has gotten to the point where it is in charge of so much of our lives, this kind of nastiness that we're seeing today is inevitable. We just think of government today as a massive enterprise that consumes more than a third of all that we produce. Anything that big is going to cause an awful lot of people to want to either get in charge of it so they can get their, quote, fair share, or get in charge of it so they can keep it off their back. Either way, we constantly fight amongst ourselves because that's what politics does to people. And the bigger government gets, the more corrupting its power becomes, and the more it tends to attract the very kind of people you would least want to have political power.
So it sounds to me like big government breeds in a climate and a culture of hopelessness. Or if they can squash that childlike wonder that humans are born with, that's where they breed best. Big government, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of self-reinforcing. The bigger it gets, the more corrupt it becomes, and then the more that good people say, I don't want to have anything to do with that, and so you end up with the worst of both worlds, big government run by bad people. Exactly,
yeah. So do you, I was talking last week with James Dale Davidson, one of the great financial gurus, and we were talking about his book, The Sovereign Individual, where he wrote that in 97, and he predicted Bitcoin and all kinds of other things way ahead of their time. His kind of principle is that the logic of violence, which is kind of like the principle that governs how governments are allowed to use their coercion in a society, it's motivated primarily by the advancement of technology and its ability to kind of keep government in power, in check, so to speak. Do you see that as kind of a big moving factor in history?
Well, I think it's a constant race. The moment that technology takes an advance, government is usually, behind the eight ball, but then it gets up to speed and uses technology to its advantage. And then we have to find a way to get around the way government misuses technology. So it's a constant race. Technology, especially the kind that allows for the monitoring of behavior and people's thoughts and communications, that's the kind to be feared, because in the hands of government it can do enormous harm.
Right. I often think about the power of, like, for example, in the Revolutionary War, they wouldn't be able to have the kind of principle where every family can have some kind of check against their central authorities, because of the invention of the musket. So that's kind of an example of how that interplay, that dance between the government and technology, is always a kind of synergy happening, right?
Yeah. And remember, too, one of the great lessons of America's founders is that they, I think, taught us something maybe recent generations have begun to forget, but they taught us that the concentration of power is the greatest threat to individual liberty, and it's an important thing in the maintenance of our liberties for people to be constantly vigilant. Even the best of governments, even one that's no bigger than I'd want it to be, that's confined to the protection of life and property, you've got to keep an eye on it, because power corrupts, and it tends to grow at the expense of the liberties of the people.
Wow. We're speaking with Lawrence Reed. I want you to visit Lawrence W. Reed, that's REED.com. That's LawrenceWReed.com, or check out the Foundation for Economic Education. That's one of the premier resources for economic liberty on the internet. It's fee.org, and I also happen to write there myself. Lawrence, on the other side of the break, I want to ask you, what do you think our position should be, or not that we have to have one position, so to speak, but how do you see this upcoming midterm election? So I want to ask you that, should we engage that, or is that just a wash at this point? We'll be right back on the other side in just a second. I'm David Gornoski, and you're listening to A Neighbor's Choice.
The whispers in the morning of lovers sleeping tight.
And welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornoski, your host, and the number to call if you'd like to be on the program today, it's 866-916-5400. That's 866-916-5400, and I'm joined in this segment by my friend Lawrence Reed, president of the Foundation for Economic Education, which you can see fee.org. That's FEE.org. You can go there today. Got wonderful essays and articles about economics and property and the ethics of liberty. And so previously we were talking about whether it's even worth voting sometimes in these elections. So I wanted to get your read on that.
Okay. Well, I'm not one of those, David, who believes that it's incumbent upon everybody to vote in every race all the time in every election. I really think we ought to have standards, and if the candidates don't meet our standards, if none of them do, remember that the lesser of two evils is still evil.
Right.
So I would say take a look at the races that you're being asked to vote upon, and if any of them don't meet the standards, if you have good reason to believe that none of the candidates, if elected, would advance your values, and I would say in my case the values of liberty and the values of strong personal character, don't feel obligated to vote for them.
Right.
I think the non-voter sends often as strong a message as those who vote.
Yeah, and it's almost like there's this voting is kind of serves. I mean, there's a function for it, but it also can serve as kind of like a religious ritual wherein you get everybody to buy into the act. So it's kind of like you can't complain because you all voted, so you kind of have to buy into the whole thing, even though it's coming with a lot of really immoral stuff that neither options on a lot of these ballots are going to do anything to stop. And so it becomes kind of a quandary for people who are very sensitive to what obligations come along with something like being a Christian, which means, in essence, a little Jesus imitator, right? So if you take that seriously, Jesus says, go and learn what it means, mercy, not sacrifice. And so it seems like people, when they go into that voting booth, it's like a ritual where they're able to anonymize and obfuscate their moral responsibility for the violence that they're about to demand, right? Well,
that's right.
No one took a photo of the ballot, so no one can see the dirty deed I'm about to do.
And I've never accepted that idea that if you don't vote, you don't have a right to complain. Well, of course you do, because they still take your money. They still take your kids, or either, or at least when it comes to schooling, they say, we take your kid, or we'll make you pay twice if you pick a different school than a government school. So I think you have every right to complain if people in government are laying claim upon you or your liberties or your money, whether you vote or not.
And you're the author. We're speaking with Larry Reed. He's the president of Fee.org, Foundation for Economic Education, one of the oldest think tanks isn't it in America? Is it the oldest? 1946.
I used to think it was, and then somebody told me that another think tank, and I can't think of the name of it, may have been set up before us. But we certainly have been the most prominent among the oldest of American think tanks since our founding in 1946.
Do you believe that that human beings can be persuaded logically to reject big government, or is it something deeper in the passions that draws people to government?
Well, I don't think there's a one pat answer to that. I think some people can be persuaded by logic, but I also believe very strongly that ultimately what we're talking about here is something that goes to the root of our personal character. And there are an awful lot of people, maybe a majority, in fact, who make decisions about government and candidates and what government should do, not upon logic or reason, but rather sometimes some very selfish motivations, what it can get for me, even if it comes at the expense of unwilling others. So there are a lot of motivations behind getting involved in government, but I think ultimately it's character makes all the difference in the world.
So how do you stand in the middle of this snowballing government that, like you said earlier, it has its own metastastic growth where it can't really seem like it can ever be curbed? How does one who wants to have free markets, who wants to take care of their family, who wants to have good medical care that doesn't, bankrupt you through government spending, how do we navigate this? Do we just say, we're going to try to create innovations, or how do we keep positive through this this tumultuous government rolling downhill and getting bigger and bigger as it goes?
I think it's important, David, to encourage people to get back to the fundamentals, to look at these issues not from a superficial standpoint or a present-day, current moment standpoint, but more important, deeply rooted, eternal principles, things like what is right and proper when it comes to my claim on other people? Am I entitled to a portion of what somebody else has earned just because I want it or even because I need it? Or am I a responsible adult human being who should seek to improve his life through voluntary interactions with others? There are a lot of people today who think that anything goes when it comes to what they think they need. And by anything goes, I mean it doesn't matter how those needs are satisfied. As long as they're satisfied, it can come by way of government force or it can come by voluntary persuasion. But I think people need to understand there's a huge difference between the two. And a society that descends down the path of using government force, to satisfy their needs is a society that's destined for economic and spiritual and moral ruin.
Right. No one would actually take a gun. Most people know that it's wrong to take a gun to someone and say, well, you make a little more than me, so I want you to pay for my birth control, or I want you to pay for my college for my kid, or I want you to pay for my government my health care or something, so I'm going to take more money and garnish your wages, or else I'm going to shoot you. But somehow there's like a religious ecstasy that takes place wherein if we do it through a ballot box, somehow it's okay. And that sounds like it sounds like silliness to me, It doesn't make any sense.
That somehow democratizing it through the ballot box makes it right. But, hey, you can do some pretty vicious and rotten things to other people by majority vote. And there's nothing about democracy that sanctifies what is essentially evil from the word go.
Right. And that's the problem that we face, is that it's always a little more convenient to say, I like liberty. It sounds good in theory. Was it Mencken or someone that said that the average person, they like liberty in theory like they like their virtue in theory? It's not really.
What they say and how they behave sometimes are two different things.
Yeah, it's easier to press a button when someone says, hey, you don't want to pay for that health care? Just give me all the power in the world and I'll solve it. Just kiss my ring and I'll give you everything that I can think of. And you just say, yeah, it's kind of nice. I'll just do that so I don't have to worry about it and watch some TV, right?
Yeah, I think for much of American history, Americans understood that in far greater numbers than they do today. Most Americans understood for probably the first century after our founding that it's just dirty business to use government to get something at other people's expense, that you couldn't rightfully get from them in a voluntary way. And so we didn't look to government to do all the things that it now does for us, and it hasn't made us any happier people. Everybody is constantly unhappy. Have you ever noticed how every candidate for every office runs on a platform of reform, which means essentially that the last guy didn't get it right, and neither will he, as long as he relies upon politics and politicians to try to solve our problems for us.
Right. And it's interesting, when Jesus was brought up in that story, he was brought up to a high place by Satan. The Satan character in the story says, if you would just worship me, I'll give you the kingdoms of the world. And I was at the city of Jericho, the old city, and that's where, if you were looking at the traditionally known temple, the mountain where temptation took place, Jesus would have seen the city of Jericho visibly as the key thing that he would notice. And in the center of that city, the highest temple mount kind of thing there in that city was a sacrificial pit where they would do ritual human sacrifice. And so in essence, Satan is basically saying to Jesus, if you would only just do what makes Jericho keep their lights on, just kill a few, just hurt a few to help the many. If you do it my way, you'll get it all. And Jesus says no, right?
Yeah, which is another way of saying the end does not justify the means. And the concentration of power is an evil thing, and the destruction of the rights to life and property of other people is never a good thing.
I think people, as they go into the ballot box, we need to think about that sentence. It is better that one man die than the whole nation perish. That's the principle behind the whole idea of big government, whether it's on the left or the right. It's the idea that one can get hurt, and that's okay because, well, the vast majority of them will get a little bit of a net benefit, right?
Yeah.
Well, who said that? Caiaphas said that before he killed Jesus. So you don't want. So think about that. Are you on the side? Are you a Caiaphian when you go to the voting booth?
Good point. I've never heard it put that way, but that's a very good point.
Right. You got two choices. You can imitate Jesus or imitate Caiaphas.
Yeah. I'd say that's a pretty easy call.
We're speaking with Lawrence Reed. He's the president of the Foundation for Economic Education. That's fee.org. I wanted to ask you, are you a long-term optimist for the state of liberty and human flourishing?
I am, because I don't see the point in pessimism. I don't know the future, but I do know that there have been many times in the past when things have looked awfully dark for people who believed in things like liberty, and they prevailed. And so I think the moment you become pessimistic, a couple of bad things happen. One is you don't work as hard as you should or could for what you know to be right, and the second thing that happens is other good people will not be attracted to your cause if they get the impression from you that it's a lost one right from the very start. So I think it's important to be optimistic because that encourages good people to work for the right things.
What does success look like to you? You've had a illustrious career in advancing liberty, and one that I would like to look to as a role model. What does success look like to you as you look back at your career?
Well, no one, of course, can ever say, because we're all humans, that we dealt with every situation properly or that we didn't fail on occasion. But it would be nice to look back and say, I'm successful or have been because I tried my best at every turn to the extent I could to do what I thought was right. I spoke truth to power. I tried to be the best example I could be for my children, for my friends, for my coworkers, and others in society. Once I knew what the right thing was, I wasn't quick to abandon it. I worked for it. In my mind, that's success. It's not defined so much in terms of material things as it is a kind of spiritual accomplishment. I'd like to be able to say that the most successful life is one that in which character was put first and foremost, and you shone as an example, or shined, whatever the word is, as a great exemplar of character for other people to emulate.
It reminds me of a T-shirt that I saw one time. It said, "Collect moments, not things." And at the end of our lives, when we're gone, we exist as stories that people tell of each other. And I would like that people would desire to have a story told about them that they did everything they could within their talent set to advance human being and wellness in a way that doesn't use sacrifice. Like, well, I advanced most people, but I did have to sacrifice that one guy, right?
Yeah, that would be a pretty big black mark on one's career, I think, if you had to say that.
I think that's what Jesus offers people that want to imitate his life, and say, hey, look, we can advance in history. We can move forward. We can be bound together. We can unite together over mercy, not sacrifice. That's the choice we all have to make every day. We make that in our workplace if we treat people less than us. We make that in the ballot box when we say, let's stick it to these guys. Let's take from them, or let's put them in a cage, and number them among the violent ones. We have that choice in everything we do. And I think what your example illustrates for us in your writing and what you do and your speaking is that it's not appropriate to you ever sacrifice even one person.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I would encourage your listeners to visit our website and type in, was Jesus a socialist? That's an essay I've written which takes a look at his perspectives on what we would today regard as economic matters. And I find him to be a great defender of things like honesty and truth in our dealings in the marketplace, and he's a great defender of private property and the creation of wealth. These are good things that are too often denigrated today, but I think our Savior would give us a very different perspective.
Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I have enjoyed it. LawrenceWreed.com and fee.org. You can also see my articles on there as well on fee.org. Thanks again, Lawrence, for being on the show.
Thank you, David. Anytime. Appreciate it.
All right. Well,
Goodbye.
Folks, you've been listening to A Neighbor's Choice Radio. We'll be right back in just a second.
Because I love you too much, baby.
Hello, folks. This is David Gornoski, your host of A Neighbor's Choice. So glad to be with you. If you want to email me, it's david@aneighborschoice.com. That's david@aneighborschoice.com. Visit the website, aneighborschoice.com, or you can go and subscribe to our YouTube channel to see our videos from the show with some of the top guests around the world. Or you can also see some exclusive interviews only found online. Just type in David Gornoski on YouTube, subscribe there. You don't want to miss it. We've got so much content. We deal with all kinds of things on this program. We deal with the news of the day. But instead of keeping you there and keeping you in that drone state of, oh boy, what's it now, right? We don't want to keep you there. We also want to take you to meet neighbors just like you who are underdogs, people who are pursuing liberty or property rights or innovation against a cascade of groupthink, whether it's bad laws or just old, outdated ideas. And so with that premise in mind, that groupthink, especially toxic groupthink that keeps us in herds and unthinking horde type mentality, when we use that principle, we can solve problems in the media, we can solve problems in politics, ethics, and we can solve things in science and technology. So normally we'll have Dr. Yu, who's my friend, is a top aerospace physicist over at Kennedy Space Center. He's not here today. He's on a super secret mission across the world. He'll be back soon, and maybe he'll have some secrets to share when he comes back. He's always up to something, folks. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see Dr. Yu appear in studio one day through a flying saucer. I just think that's something we might have on live radio. I don't know what that's going to do to the equipment. I don't know if there's going to be interference on the live radio show, but we'll do our best when that moment happens. I think it could happen. But Dr. Yu is one of those guys on the front lines of always challenging old ideas. He wants to say, hey, maybe we need to rethink what an electron is because it actually doesn't look like what the textbook says. Maybe we need to think what gravity is. Maybe gravity is not as we thought it was. Maybe there's properties to gravity that if we could understand would give us better insights. And that's the kind of spirit we want to inculcate. And that's what we do each week on A Neighbor's Choice. We won't be here next week. There'll be an election coverage, special coverage of news. And frankly, I'm not as interested in who's winning the elections, because at the end of the day, I'm interested in solving the big problems so that when we're, old and gray and we're looking back at our kids, we'll say, you know what? We did the hard thing when it wasn't popular. We said no to both, establishment status quo. I don't think Mitch McConnell's going to give me liberty. Do you? Do you think Mitch McConnell is going to give you liberty if he gets a little bit more time in the sun? He sat in power, these guys did, for 2 years, and there's some good things that have come about, definitely. But, they sat in power and they didn't do hardly anything. They nibbled on the taxes a little bit. They nibbled it. They cut off a couple branches on that big old tax tree. But they really didn't gut the real things that matter. And so I do like competition in government. I do like the idea that both parties are in gridlock. That's a good thing. We need to have gridlock, because when government doesn't have carte blanche to be able to just railroad over our liberties, well, it's good to have some kind of check. And so I think it's good to have both of these parties at each other's throat so they're not at our throats, And so that's one of the things that I want us to think about as we move forward on this program is what actually matters. What matters? Is it the TV, the way the TV always wants to get us in a state of despair and anger and aggression? We need to really have a soul-searching moment in this culture, because we have people, we have these shootings going on. We have mobs screaming at people in restaurants. We're coming apart at the seams. And it sounds like we're having a mental meltdown as a society. And there needs to be a real look in the mirror for once. Stop looking at the world as if you're some kind of, child that, you just got to pout and scream and stomp your feet because your life isn't the way it wants to, you want it to be, whether you're on the left or the right. You don't get to blame the world for your problems, that your health care isn't government controlled enough, that your environment needs to be more centrally planned by people in the Paris Climate Accord in the EU or something. Like, you need to solve your problems ourselves. That's the only thing that matters. You can get all the power in the world given to some idol in government, but they're never going to give you what you thought they would give you, because that's not what really bothers us. The great Russian writer Solzhenitsyn said that the line between good and evil, it cuts through the heart of every man. And so if we would stop looking at, we got to destroy this judge, and he's the monster. He's part of rape culture, they say. Or let's destroy and villainize Trump. If we just get rid of him, then we'll, give me a break. It's a joke that we've spent so much of our energy just hating and blaming other people, because somehow it gives us some semblance of catharsis. I got to get that guy. He lost this power next week, right? That's what the Democrats want. But that's not going to solve their problems. They're going to be angry about something the next day. So politics is nothing but an illusion, really. It's like watching pro wrestling and expecting to learn the art of martial arts through it. You're not going to get anything out of it. It's just an illusion. It's a distraction. There are some times to vote, but you don't feel forced to vote just because, everybody's doing it, okay? Peer pressure is not the foundation of ethics. Everybody's doing it. I have to do it. It's okay. No, it's not okay. That's why we're in the problem we're in with today. That's why we have trillions of dollars in debt. We're just going to pass that on to our children, because we're just going to keep voting and doing the same thing and saying, well, we just need Mitch McConnell to have just 2 more senators and then we'll get rid of the income tax. Sure. Okay. We'll see what that guy does, huh? Just give him 3 more Republicans and Mitch and Paul Ryan or whoever else they'll throw up there. They'll really get the Constitution read this time. Give me a break. Folks, don't worry about politics. Keep your eyes on the prize. The prize is a life well lived, a life about purpose and virtue and loving your neighbor as yourself. Jesus split time. We count our time 2018 in the year of Jesus. That's someone you want to look to as someone to model your life after, whether you're an atheist, an agnostic, a Buddhist, whatever it is. If he's important enough that people count their time based on his time on earth, you're going to want to study that person's biography. I mean, we read Steve Jobs' biographies that are like 600 pages about how he created the iPod, because we want to learn from his juju. We're going to want to get some of his innovation genius into our lives, right? Well, we would do well to study Jesus' life and to take it seriously, not as some kind of bludgeon to pick a denominational tribe, because that's just a whole nother waste of time, but to study the person of Jesus and say, how can I be like that in my life? Someone who boldly questions the crowd, but is also merciful. Someone who doesn't mince words against crooks and conniving forces, but is also gentle to the outsider, to the misfit, to the underdog. That is a person we should all want to imitate. Not the latest flavor of the month in politics, but someone who has the test of time on his side. Someone who said, you'll do greater things than me. That's the kind of role model we want to be like, because when we're like that, we'll break this cycle of shame and blame games that always keeps us locked in at each other's throats. There are so many problems to solve. We don't need to rely on sacrifice to do it. We'll be back in just a second, folks. You're listening to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gornoski. See you in a second.
Hi, this is David Gornoski, founder of A Neighbor's Choice. A Neighbor's Choice is sponsored by people just like you, making weekly or monthly contributions to support the development of this show, which is dedicated to introducing Jesus' personhood revolution to the broader public. Visit www.aneighborschoice.com, click on Contribute, and start your monthly pledge today. We appreciate your support.
A Neighbor's Choice Radio is back in our final segment of the night. I'm your host, David Gornoski, broadcasting the things that nobody else wants to broadcast, the things underneath the big headlines on the big cable channels. And that's people just like you, struggling to fight for their liberty and to love their neighbor, using their talents as they can to make their life and their family and their friends better. The problems we have, they're not that difficult to solve. But the key ingredient is to have courage to rethink the founding kind of parameters that the establishment wants us to keep us locked into this kind of negative frequency. We can create a new frequency of thought where we're all resonating on a whole new plane of thought. And that involves positive thinking together, the problems, and finding solutions that don't require violence, right? That's the problem we have today. You have violence, these shootings, these horrific shootings, people blaming other people because they're a part of a race. Give me a break. This is atrocious. This is a joke. Anybody that wants to shoot people because they belong to another race or a tribe or ideology, that's someone who's given up their mind to groupthink so bad they become a shrunken soul, a sick person who wants to harm people because they look like another human they don't like or something. This is a weak victim mentality that is plaguing many people, and we cannot succumb to it. We have to have a winner's energy because life is not a zero-sum game. Life is not, oh, I win. In order for me to win, you've got to lose. I got to take something from you. I got to steal some money from you. Raise your taxes, regulate your business, villainize you, run you off of social media. Somehow I got to take some flesh from you in order for me to feel good. That's not the way life has to be. That's not how adults actually make things work. We have a win-win mentality. That's what heroes, that's what people that love their families, they have a win-win mentality. When you make a family happy, everybody wins. It's not, oh, well, dad wins, therefore the kid loses. No. That's not how normal, functioning, healthy life is about. So that's the key principle that we need to take into this election season, no matter what happens. Don't rely on these politicians as your idols to solve the problems for you. You can get passionate about it. You can get into it. And there's some real things at stake that they can have some influence over, for sure. But the moment we rely our hopes and dreams and cast them into these characters, we're going to lose sight of what really matters. So I wrote a few principles down that I want you to take away. These are the issues that if we solve these problems, those of us who love free markets, we love freedom, we love virtue and self-responsibility. If we take these principles and we say, I'm going to solve these problems together. I'm going to look online. I'm going to go to alternative sources and find people who are creating these solutions for these issues and back them either through promoting their work on your social media or telling your friends about it, or whether you can do it yourself. Anybody can be involved if we think creatively. So here's a few things. The average person will keep going along with big government until those of us who believe in the power of the market to solve the biggest anxieties the state presumes to confront. These are the issues that we have to solve. We have to solve health, the damaging pollution that is caused by, we have to solve rare earth minerals, having reliable access to rare earth minerals. Another issue the state says that they can solve, that only they can solve, is illnesses and medicine, healthcare. And the other one is transportation, So if we can solve health, right? Let's look at health for example. We have this belief that only Washington can manage our medicine for us. That only we got to pick and choose, who's going to manage a big giant FDA. We don't need that. What we need to do is actually solve these chronic illnesses ourselves. And so that's why we have people like Dr. Seafried come on the program, where he is a cancer researcher who's using ketogenic diet instead of big, expensive government paid for medicine, right? And if we want to solve things like, pollution, right? We can solve pollution by looking into clean energy, things that the market people, there's some kind of inventor out there right now who's working on a clean energy technology that won't rely on a dime of government subsidy. We need to support people like those guys. Look them up. They're on YouTube. They're online. I know some of these people working on alternative energies that don't rely on Saudi Arabian oil or some big government scheme that's going to tax us to death and regulate us to death. So there's all kinds of solutions, whether it's in health, whether it's in pollution and energy, whether it's in transportation, which is related to energy, or even rare earth minerals, okay? There are ways to create rare earth minerals from common minerals. There's ways to do that. I've seen evidence of it. There are people out there doing things that the science says you can't do because they don't rely on the status quo to solve them. They solve these problems themselves. So I want you all to think of that as we go into this election season, the final week. Look for those real heroes on the front lines, because those are the things that we can have hope and that we can actually advance real change in the world for. If you want to email me, david@aneighborschoice.com. That's david@aneighborschoice.com. david@aneighborschoice.com. That's the email address. We'll see you shortly in a couple weeks for more exciting interviews. You don't know who's going to show up next. This is David Gornoski. You've been listening to A Neighbor's Choice. Godspeed.